Picture standing on the shore of an ancient sea, listening to whispers carried by the wind stories of an island so advanced, so magnificent, that it vanished beneath the waves in a single day. Atlantis isn't just a myth, it's a puzzle that has captivated explorers, scientists, and dreamers for thousands of years. But what if this legend, and others like it, aren't just fantastical tales? What if they're echoes of real events, lost civilizations, natural disasters, or even celestial phenomena woven into the fabric of human memory? From the floating cities of Hindu epics to the vanishing islands of Polynesian lore, these stories share a haunting similarity. They describe places that slipped through the fingers of history, leaving behind only questions. Today, we're diving into the secret science buried in these myths. Think about it. How could cultures separated by oceans and centuries describe such strikingly similar phenomena? Could the sinking of Atlantis mirror the aftermath of a massive volcanic eruption, like the one that shattered the island of Thera in the Aegean Sea 3,600 years ago? Might the floating city of Lanka from the Ramayana be a distorted memory of advanced engineering or optical illusions caused by rare atmospheric conditions? These aren't just wild guesses. Modern geology, archaeology, and even astronomy are beginning to uncover startling connections between legend and reality. This journey isn't just about solving ancient riddles. It's about understanding how our ancestors made sense of a world far more mysterious than ours. They didn't have satellites or seismographs, but they had something just as powerful: observation and storytelling. So why do these myths still grip us? Perhaps because they remind us that even in an age of science, the line between fact and folklore is thinner than we think. Over the next few minutes, we'll unravel the threads of these vanishing islands and floating cities, revealing the hidden truths that might have inspired them, and why, centuries later, we're still searching for answers. The past isn't just gone, it's waiting to be rediscovered. Myths are more than just stories, they're time capsules, carrying fragments of truth across generations like messages in a bottle. Think about how many cultures, separated by vast oceans and centuries, tell eerily similar tales of lands that disappeared or cities that floated above the waves. The Celts spoke of Avalon, an island shrouded in mist. The Greeks whispered of Atlantis, swallowed by the sea. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka, a gleaming city that sank beneath the ocean. These aren't random fantasies, they're echoes of something deeper, a collective human response to the inexplicable. What's fascinating is how often these myths align with real phenomena. Take the story of Wise, a legendary Breton city said to have drowned in a single night. Geologists now suspect it might be linked to ancient floods caused by melting glaciers at the end of the last ice age. Or consider the Maori legend of Tianumonyu, an island that vanished after a great upheaval. Could it be a memory of a volcanic collapse or tsunami? Even the floating city of Lanka from the Ramayana might have roots in reality. Some researchers suggest it could describe a sophisticated system of canals or even mirages created by unusual weather patterns over water. These stories persist because they do more than entertain, they encode survival knowledge. A tale about a sinking island isn't just a warning, it's a lesson passed down through generations, a way to prepare for disasters that might strike again. And now, science is beginning to decode them. Satellite imaging reveals sunken landmasses off the coasts of India and Indonesia that match descriptions in ancient texts. Core samples from lake beds and ocean floors show evidence of catastrophic floods that could have inspired these myths. It's as if our ancestors left us a trail of breadcrumbs, not in words we could read, but in stories we could remember. The real magic lies in how these narratives bridge the gap between the known and the unknown. They transform earthquakes into the wrath of gods, tsunamis into swallowed cities, and advanced engineering into floating fortresses. But strip away the embellishments and you're left with something remarkable: observations. People witnessed extraordinary events and did their best to explain them with the tools they had. Today, we're piecing together those clues with sonar and sediment cores, realizing that the line between myth and history isn't as solid as we once thought. The next time you hear an old legend about a vanishing island, don't dismiss it as fantasy. Ask what truth might be hiding beneath the waves. Plato's account of Atlantis is more than just a story. It's a detailed blueprint of a civilization so advanced it defies belief. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, he describes a vast island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, with concentric rings of water and land, towering statues, and engineering marvels powered by a mysterious metal called orichalcum. But what's most striking isn't the grandeur, it's the precision. Plato gives exact dimensions, locations, even the timeline of Atlantis's downfall, 9,000 years before his own time, swallowed by the sea in a single catastrophic day. This isn't the vague stuff of campfire tales, it's a report, and that raises a tantalizing question. Was he recording something real? Modern science offers intriguing possibilities. One leading theory points to the volcanic eruption that obliterated the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, around 1600 BCE. The explosion was so massive, it reshaped the Mediterranean, triggering tsunamis that may have reached as far as Crete, toppling the mighty Minoan civilization. Sound familiar? A thriving society wiped out by the sea in an instant, just like Atlantis. The timeline doesn't match Plato's, but myths often compress time, blending events across generations. Then there's Doggerland, a once thriving landmass connecting Britain to Europe, submerged by rising seas around 6500 BCE. Could stories of its drowning have traveled south, morphing into the Atlantis legend over millennia? But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Plato insists Atlantis was an imperial power, waging war on ancient Athens before its demise. No evidence of such a conflict exists, but what if he wasn't describing a literal war? Some scholars suggest the tale encodes a deeper struggle, humanity's battle against nature's fury. The concentric rings of Atlantis mirror the calderas of volcanic islands, and the wrath of the gods that sank it might symbolize earthquakes or tsunamis. Even the mysterious orichalcum could be a distorted memory of advanced Bronze Age metallurgy, like the shimmering copper alloys found in Minoan ruins. What makes Atlantis endure isn't just the mystery of its location, it's the way it mirrors our own fears and fascinations. A society brought low by its own hubris, punished by forces beyond its control, feels uncomfortably relevant today. And if Atlantis has roots in real disasters, what other so-called myths might be hiding similar truths? From the sunken kingdoms of Welsh folklore to the drowned cities of Japan's Jomon period, these stories aren't just about loss, they're about survival. They remind us that civilizations rise and fall, but the stories we tell about them, those might just outlast us all. Floating cities and airborne kingdoms appear in folklore across the world, each one shimmering with the same uncanny blend of wonder and warning. Take the Flying Dutchman, that ghostly ship doomed to sail the skies forever, not just a sailor's superstition, but a symbol of humanity's fraught relationship with the unknown. Or Laputa, Jonathan Swift's floating island in Gulliver's Travels, where absent-minded scientists drift so high they lose touch with the Earth entirely. These stories share a pattern. They're not just about defying gravity, but about the dangers of overreach. A floating city isn't just a marvel, it's a mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties about ambition and isolation. What's striking is how these myths converge with modern dreams. Today's futurists sketch concepts like ocean-spanning floating habitats or mile-high sky cities, technocratic utopias that echo Laputa's aloof grandeur. Even the Flying Dutchman finds a parallel in experimental airships and drone fleets. But here's the twist: the old tales always carry a price. The Dutchman's crew is cursed. Laputa's rulers are tyrannical. These aren't just fanciful details, they're cautionary lessons. Our ancestors understood that to conquer the skies or seas wasn't just a feat of engineering. It was a bargain with forces far beyond human control. So why do these ideas persist? Part of it's practical. Floating cities solve real problems: rising seas, overcrowding, the need for new frontiers. But the deeper answer lies in psychology. Floating represents ultimate freedom, but also rootlessness. To build in the clouds or on the waves is to reject the Earth itself, and that tension resonates across time. The Mahabharata's aerial city of Hiranyapura, the Aztec myth of Aztlan rising from the waters, even the biblical Tower of Babel, all grapple with the same paradox: the higher we climb, the farther we might fall. Science now offers ways to test these legends. Could ancient floating cities have been inspired by rare optical phenomena, like the Fata Morgana mirage that makes distant ships appear to hover? Or might stories of airborne kingdoms stem from early encounters with advanced civilizations, like the Inca, who built suspension bridges so light they seemed to float? The line between myth and prototype is thinner than we think. When engineers today design floating solar islands or airborne megastructures, they're not just innovating, they're stepping into an old story. One that reminds us the desire to rise above our limits is timeless, but so are the warnings about what we might leave behind. The ocean has a way of rewriting maps, sometimes slowly, over centuries, and sometimes in the span of a single storm. Take the Carteret Islands in the Pacific, where palm trees now stand knee-deep in saltwater, their roots gnawed away by tides that rise higher every year. Or the vanishing nation of Kiribati, its president famously purchasing land in Fiji as a retreat for displaced citizens. These aren't just modern tragedies, they're echoes of something ancient. Because long before climate change entered our vocabulary, islands were disappearing, swallowed by subsiding coastlines, shattered by earthquakes, or drowned by glacial melt. And if it's happening today, why wouldn't it have happened thousands of years ago? Geology tells us land doesn't just vanish without a trace. Subsidence, where the ground sinks due to shifting tectonic plates or collapsing underground cavities, can drag entire coastlines underwater. The legendary island of High Brassel, marked on medieval maps off Ireland's coast, might have been inspired by a real sandbank that vanished as sea levels rose after the last ice age. Then there's erosion, the silent sculptor, waves chipping away at limestone atolls until they fracture, like the Solomon Islands, where 5 islands have already been erased from satellite images. Even volcanic islands born in fire can collapse catastrophically. Around 7,000 years ago, a chunk of Hawaii's Big Island slid into the sea, triggering a tsunami taller than a 30-story building. Imagine witnessing that and living to tell the tale. What story would you concoct to explain it? Now, layer science over myth. The Polynesian legend of Te Fiti, a lush island that sank after a goddess's heart was stolen, mirrors the fate of real Pacific atolls succumbing to rising seas. The Welsh tale of Cantre Gwaelod, a kingdom drowned when a well was left untended, could describe a breached seawall or a sudden flood from glacial melt. These stories aren't just poetic, they're survival guides. Oral histories from Alaska's Tlingit people describe glaciers retreating as fast as a dog runs, a detail later confirmed by geological records. Our ancestors weren't just storytellers, they were witnesses, encoding warnings in myth because they had no other way to preserve them. But here's the twist: if sinking lands feel inevitable, floating ones might not be as far-fetched as they seem. Modern engineers are already designing buoyant cities to combat rising waters, like the proposed Oceanics project off South Korea. And suddenly, the floating city of Lanka or the airborne kingdom of Laputa don't seem like pure fantasy, they feel like blueprints. Maybe the ancients weren't just imagining escape from a drowning world. Maybe they were dreaming of solutions. The idea of a city floating effortlessly above the waves or suspended in the sky feels like pure fantasy until you unpack the physics behind it. Buoyancy, the same force that keeps a wooden ship afloat, could theoretically support an entire metropolis. Picture a modern floating city like Oceanics, designed with hexagonal platforms anchored to the seabed, their hollow bases displacing enough water to counteract the weight of buildings above. It's not magic, it's Archimedes' principle in action. Even ancient civilizations understood this on some level. The Aztecs built Tenochtitlan on a lake, their chinampas, artificial islands made of woven reeds and mud acting like natural buoyant modules. Fast forward to today, and engineers are simply scaling up the concept with steel and composite materials. But what about those legends of cities hovering in midair? Here's where perception twists reality. Early sailors might have glimpsed Fata Morgana mirages, where layers of warm and cool air bend light to make distant ships or landmasses appear to levitate. The Vikings spoke of sky castles glimpsed in Arctic haze, possibly distorted views of ice flows or coastal cliffs. And let's not forget the role of ice itself. In colder regions, massive bergs calving from glaciers could have resembled floating fortresses, especially when draped in mist. Combine these phenomena with the human brain's knack for pattern recognition, and suddenly, a shimmering horizon becomes a sky kingdom. The real genius of these myths lies in their adaptability. A floating city isn't just a technical marvel, it's a metaphor for human ingenuity straining against limits. When the Mahabharata describes Lanka's golden towers defying gravity, or Plato writes of Atlantis's concentric rings, they're grappling with the same challenges modern engineers face: stability, resource distribution, and the delicate balance between ambition and hubris. Today's prototypes, like Japan's floating eco-cities or Dubai's proposed seasteading communities, are just the latest chapter in an old story, one where the line between impossible and not yet keeps shifting. Perception shapes legend, but it also reveals something deeper. When our ancestors saw mirages and called them cities, they weren't just wrong, they were hopeful. They imagined a world where humanity could rise above its constraints, even if only in stories. And now, as science turns those stories into blueprints, we're left with a thrilling question. If ancient myths could foreshadow modern engineering, what other impossible dreams might still be waiting in the fog just beyond the horizon? The human eye is both a remarkable tool and a master of deception, especially when nature decides to play tricks with light and air. Imagine a weary sailor scanning the horizon after days at sea, only to spot a shimmering city suspended in the sky. No magic, no gods, just the eerie spectacle of a Fata Morgana mirage. Named after the enchantress Morgan Le Fay, these illusions occur when layers of warm and cool air bend light, distorting distant objects into elongated, floating apparitions. A ship on the horizon might stretch into a towering castle, a coastal cliff could appear to hover like a celestial fortress. For ancient mariners with no knowledge of atmospheric science, these visions weren't optical quirks. They were proof of another world just out of reach. History is littered with phantom islands born from these tricks of the light. Take the legendary Friesland, a sprawling landmass that appeared on maps for centuries, charted by sailors who swore they'd walked its shores. Scholars now believe it was a misreading of mirages blending the Faroe Islands with sea fog. Or consider the Flying Dutchman, not just a ghost ship but a recurring vision of spectral landmasses reported in the North Sea, where temperature inversions warp the horizon into fleeting islands that vanish as ships approach. Even St. Brendan's mythical Isle of the Blessed, said to appear and disappear in the Atlantic, might have been a mirage of the Azores shrouded in mist. The science behind these illusions is as elegant as it is unsettling. When sunlight passes through air layers of different temperatures, it bends, refracting like a straw in a glass of water. In deserts, this creates the classic oasis mirage, where distant sky appears as water. Over the ocean, the effect is more dramatic. A fata morgana can stack multiple inverted images, turning a lone iceberg into a jagged skyline or a single ship into an armada. The Inuit have long spoken of sky shores, phantom coasts hovering above the sea, while medieval Arab geographers wrote of Jazirat al-Majis, an island that danced on the waves, both likely descriptions of the same phenomenon. But mirages aren't the only culprits. Superior mirages caused by cold air trapping warm air beneath it can make objects appear elevated or distorted. In 1837, explorers in the Arctic recorded seeing a mountain range they named Crocker Land, only to discover years later it didn't exist. The mountains were a 100-mile distortion of Greenland's peaks, stretched across the horizon by atmospheric bending. Even the famous green flash at sunset, a burst of emerald light as the sun dips below the sea, has been mistaken for fleeting land. These aren't just mistakes, they're evidence of how perception and environment conspire to rewrite reality. Now, layer these scientific explanations onto ancient myths. Could the floating city of Lanka, with its golden spires, untouchable by mortals, have been a fata morgana magnified by tropical heat? Might the Norse Lyngbakka, a whale-like island that sank when sailors tried to land, have been a mirage dissolving as winds shifted? The key lies in how memory transforms these events. A sailor's tale of a vanishing island, passed down through generations, becomes a saga of cursed lands or divine punishment. The line between observed phenomenon and myth blurs with each retelling, until science peels back the layers to reveal the shimmering truth beneath. Yet even knowing the mechanics doesn't strip these illusions of their power. There's something haunting about the idea that our ancestors stood on shores, watching cities rise from the waves only to see them dissolve like salt in water. It makes you wonder, if a mirage can birth a legend, what other impossible sights might still be waiting to be explained? The past is full of such riddles, and sometimes the most magical answers lie not in folklore, but in the physics of light itself. Human memory is a shape-shifter, subtly altering details with each retelling, until the line between what happened and what we remember blurs beyond recognition. Now imagine that process unfolding over generations, as stories pass from elders to children around campfires across centuries, morphing with every voice that carries them forward. That's the alchemy of oral tradition. A landslide becomes a dragon's wrath, a volcanic sunset transforms into the glow of a god's forge, and a tsunami's roar evolves into the anger of the sea itself. But buried beneath those layers of embellishment are kernels of truth waiting to be uncovered. Take the Great Flood myths, which appear in over 200 cultures worldwide. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh describes walls of water swallowing the earth, while the Bible's Noah builds an ark to survive the deluge. Indigenous Australian tales speak of ancestral heroes escaping rising seas in hollow logs. These aren't just coincidences, they're likely fragmented memories of real catastrophes. Geologists have found evidence of a massive Black Sea flood around 7,600 years ago, when glacial melt breached a natural dam, submerging thousands of square miles in months. For coastal communities, that event wouldn't just be a disaster, it would be the end of their world, and when survival hinges on remembering, stories become the vessel. But here's the twist: oral traditions don't just preserve events, they encode them. The Klamath people of North America tell of a battle between the sky god Skell and the underworld spirit Lau, ending with Mount Mazama collapsing in fire and water. Modern geology confirms that Mazama's eruption 7,700 years ago created Oregon's Crater Lake. The details are mythic, but the timeline is precise. Similarly, the Maori story of Tianumanu's sinking includes a warning: when the sea recedes unusually far, run inland. It's a direct reference to tsunami behavior, centuries before the term existed. This raises a tantalizing possibility. Some myths might be more than just stories, they could be ancient survival manuals. The Greek legend of Atlantis sinking in a single day and night mirrors the abrupt collapse of volcanic islands like Thera. Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories describe coastal landmarks now underwater, matching sea level rise data from the end of the last ice age. Even the Viking tale of Ragnarök, with its poisoned skies and crumbling lands, reads like an eyewitness account of a volcanic winter. When your culture depends on oral history, accuracy isn't about dates and names, it's about preserving the lessons that keep people alive. The most fascinating examples blur the line between myth and memory entirely. In southern India, the Sangam poems describe a vast continent called Kumari Kandam, lost to the ocean. Modern sonar surveys reveal submerged river valleys off India's coast, hinting at lands flooded millennia ago. Or consider the Yurok people of California, whose stories of the world tilting align with seismic shifts along the Cascadia Fault. These narratives aren't just metaphors, they're maps layered with clues about earthquakes, eruptions, and rising seas. So where does myth end and history begin? Perhaps the answer lies in how we listen. When the Haida of the Pacific Northwest speak of a time when the ocean climbed the land, they're not spinning fables, they're documenting a tsunami that struck their shores in the 1700s. When Plato writes of Atlantis, he might be channeling a distorted memory of Bronze Age collapse. The key is recognizing that our ancestors weren't just storytellers, they were scientists in their own right, observing nature's patterns and encoding them in forms unforgettable. That's the real power of these tales. They compress millennia of observation into symbols that endure not just as entertainment, but as warnings, maps, and even blueprints. Today, as we piece together ancient climate data or track fault lines, we're doing the same thing they did, turning raw chaos into narrative. The difference is we have satellites and seismographs. They had something equally potent: the human voice, passing down truths disguised as legends, waiting for the right moment to be understood. Ancient texts often read like cryptic engineering manuals, hinting at technologies so advanced they blur the line between myth and prototype. Take the Vimanas, those soaring chariots described in Hindu epics, said to traverse the skies with a hum like bees in flight. The Mahabharata details their construction: mercury vortex engines, metallic alloys, lighter than air, and propulsion systems powered by sun crystals. To modern ears, it sounds like science fiction until you consider how closely these descriptions mirror cutting-edge aerospace concepts. Mercury propulsion recalls ion thrusters used in satellites today, while sun crystals evoke solar sails harnessing light particles for movement. Could these be garbled accounts of real machines, their principles preserved as legend when the original knowledge faded? The Sanskrit text Samarangana Sutradhara even provides bafflingly precise instructions for building a vimana, mentioning hollow copper pipes, rotating spheres, and a mysterious energy source called Shakti. No surviving artifacts match these descriptions, but the specificity is striking. It's as if someone, whether a visionary or an eyewitness, recorded details too intricate to invent wholesale. Parallels emerge globally. The biblical Ezekiel's wheel, a fiery aircraft-like vision with rings full of eyes, or the Aboriginal Australian Wandjina spirits, depicted with haloed helmets reminiscent of astronaut suits. These aren't just coincidences, they're fragments of a puzzle suggesting ancient cultures might have glimpsed or even built technologies we're only now rediscovering. But here's the twist. If these myths encode real engineering, how did the knowledge vanish? One theory points to the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, when climate disasters and invasions shattered civilizations from Greece to India. Advanced techniques like the Damascus steel of later centuries were often guarded secrets, lost when their makers perished. Another possibility: these stories aren't literal blueprints but metaphors for spiritual transcendence, later misinterpreted as physical machines. The Vimana's flight might symbolize enlightenment, their engines representing inner energy channels like the chakras. Yet even this interpretation raises questions. Why do so many cultures use mechanical imagery to describe the divine? Sacred geometry might hold the key. From the pyramid's precise alignments to the mandala's mapping cosmic order, ancient builders embedded mathematical constants into their structures, constants that resurface in modern physics. The golden ratio governs everything from galaxy spirals to DNA helices. The Fibonacci sequence appears in temple proportions and quantum equations alike. Could myths of floating cities and anti-gravity devices be allegories for this hidden architecture of reality? Plato hinted as much when he described Atlantis's rings as harmonious with the music of the spheres, a phrase echoing the vibrational frequencies studied in string theory today. The deeper we dig, the more these ancient stories resemble a bridge not just between past and present, but between intuition and evidence. They challenge us to wonder, if our ancestors could envision technologies millennia ahead of their time, what else might their myths be trying to tell us? Across cultures and centuries, myths whisper of cities built with impossible precision, places where streets align with celestial paths, towers defy gravity, and every stone hums with geometric perfection. These aren't just aesthetic choices, they're expressions of sacred geometry, the ancient belief that certain shapes and ratios hold divine power. Consider Atlantis's concentric rings, said to resonate with the music of the spheres, or the Hindu city of Dwarka, its layout mirroring the sacred Sri Yantra mandala. Even the Bible's New Jerusalem descends from heaven as a cube of perfect proportions. But what if these descriptions aren't just poetic flourishes? What if they're coded references to real architectural principles, later distorted into legends of floating marvels? Sacred geometry treats shapes as more than design elements, they're cosmic blueprints. The golden ratio, found in everything from nautilus shells to galaxies, appears in the pyramid's dimensions and Greek temples' columns. The flower of life, a pattern of overlapping circles, surfaces in Egyptian tombs and Chinese imperial palaces. These patterns weren't arbitrary, they were thought to channel harmony between earth and sky. When the Mahabharata describes Lanka's floating towers arranged in celestial alignment, it might be recounting an actual city planned using these principles, its symmetry so flawless it seemed otherworldly. Modern architects still employ these ratios. Think of the Parthenon's proportions replicated in skyscrapers, proving their enduring power. Yet over time, symbolic perfection could morph into literal fantasy. A city designed to reflect the heavens might become, in retellings, a place suspended among them. Take the legendary Shambhala, hidden in the Himalayas and depicted as a wheel with 8 spokes, a mandala made real. Early travelers' accounts of real fortified cities like Tibet's Jayantsi, with its tiered stupa resembling a cosmic axis, could have blended with spiritual ideals, birthing tales of airborne kingdoms. Even the Mayan pyramid of Kukulkan, with its 91 steps on each side totaling 365, encodes astronomical knowledge so precise it feels supernatural. To awestruck observers, such feats might defy earthly explanation, nudging stories toward the mythical. The psychological pull of these myths taps into something deeper, humanity's hunger for order in chaos. Perfect cities represent control over nature, time, even destiny. They're antidotes to floods and quakes, promises that somewhere, someone mastered the universe's randomness. No wonder they captivate us. In a world of uneven sidewalks and crumbling infrastructure, the idea of streets that never crack or towers that never tilt isn't just fantasy, it's catharsis. And when those ideals collide with the limits of physics, the mind bridges the gap with magic. A temple aligned to solstices becomes a portal to the gods. A canal system so efficient it mirrors the Nile's delta transforms into a floating metropolis. Perhaps the most telling detail lies in how these myths endure. Today's architects still chase biophilic design, shaping buildings that mimic nature's geometry to soothe the brain. We flock to virtual worlds like Minecraft or Sim City, subconsciously rebuilding those mythic perfections pixel by pixel. The craving hasn't faded, it's evolved. Sacred geometry wasn't just about building cities. It was about encoding humanity's highest aspirations into stone and story. And when the stones crumble, the stories remain, floating just beyond reach, whispering of a world where every angle is exact, every line leads somewhere divine, and nothing, not even gravity, can disrupt the balance. There's something primal about the way lost worlds tug at our imagination, an itch that no amount of logic can scratch. Vanishing islands and floating cities aren't just stories, they're psychological doorways tapping into our deepest fears and desires. Think about it, why do these myths persist across millennia, from Plato's Atlantis to the neon-lit ruins of Bioshock's Rapture? The answer lies in the human psyche itself. We're wired to crave the unattainable, to romanticize what's just out of reach. A city swallowed by the sea isn't just a tragedy, it's a mystery begging to be solved, a puzzle that promises revelation if only we could dive deep enough. Psychologists call this the appeal of the ineffable, the allure of things that defy explanation. It's the same force that draws us to abandoned places or unsolved codes. Lost worlds like Atlantis or the sunken kingdom of Wise represent the ultimate what if, a blank canvas for our fantasies, but there's a flip side, fear of the unknown. The ocean, with its crushing depths and shifting tides, is the perfect metaphor for life's unpredictability. A floating city, then, becomes a fragile defiance of that chaos, a precarious dream hovering above the abyss. No wonder these stories resonate. They're not just about places, they're about us. Modern media understands this instinctively. Take Bioshock's Rapture, a utopia sunk by its own hubris, a direct descendant of Atlantis' cautionary tale. Or Avatar's Pandora, floating mountains and all, tapping into that same wonder our ancestors felt for Lanka's golden spires. Even Interstellar's watery planet Miller, where time slips like sand through fingers, echoes the ephemeral nature of mythic land. These aren't just creative choices, they're proof that the symbols buried in ancient stories still hold power. But here's the twist: these myths don't just entertain, they drive us. History's greatest explorers, from Columbus to Cousteau, were chasing shadows of legend. Medieval maps marked Terra Australis Incognita, a hypothetical southern land inspired by old tales. The search for El Dorado fueled expeditions across the Amazon. Even today, satellite scans comb the Mediterranean for Atlantis's ruins. It's as if these stories are compass needles, pointing us toward the next frontier. So what's the secret? Perhaps it's this: myths aren't just relics, they're fuel. Every time we imagine a city beneath the waves or a fortress in the clouds, we're rehearsing for discovery. The past whispers through these stories, not to taunt us with what's lost, but to remind us how much is left to find. Legends have a way of setting sail long before the ships do, whispering of golden cities and uncharted paradises just over the horizon, luring explorers into the unknown. Take El Dorado, the Gilded King said to rule a city where gold dust rained like pollen. For centuries, conquistadors hacked through jungles, convinced it lay beyond the next river. They never found their golden utopia, but in the search, they mapped the Amazon's vast network, documenting flora and fauna unseen by European eyes. The myth was fiction, but the knowledge gained was undeniably real. This pattern repeats like a refrain throughout history. The Greeks spoke of Hyperion, a land where the sun never set, a tale that might have inspired Pythias, the ancient mariner who ventured beyond the Mediterranean and described the midnight sun of the Arctic. His accounts were dismissed as fables, yet modern archaeology confirms he likely reached Norway or Iceland. Even Columbus, clutching a copy of Marco Polo's travels, was chasing shadows of Cathay and the Indies when he stumbled upon the Americas. The irony: myths often led explorers to discoveries far stranger than the fantasies they sought. The 20th century traded galleons for submarines but kept the same thirst for legend. Jacques Cousteau, armed with sonar and cameras, didn't just hunt shipwrecks, he chased the ghost of Atlantis, probing the Aegean for clues to Thera's eruption. Though he never found Plato's lost city, his expeditions revolutionized underwater archaeology, revealing entire Bronze Age ports swallowed by the sea. Every dive added a piece to humanity's puzzle, proving that even failed quests could rewrite history. What's fascinating is how these searches blur the line between delusion and discovery. The mythical Island of Demons off Canada, feared by 16th-century sailors as a haunt of spirits, turned out to be Quebec's Anticosti Island, its eerie fog and walrus herds mistaken for monsters. The Sea of Darkness that terrified Arab cartographers, just the Atlantic's uncharted vastness, later crossed by ships that would connect continents. Fear and wonder, it seems, are two sides of the same compass. Now, archaeology takes up the torch, sifting through sediment and folklore alike. When Heinrich Schliemann followed Homer's verses to unearth Troy, he proved that epic poetry could be a surprisingly accurate map. Modern researchers apply the same logic, using Maori oral histories to locate submerged villages in New Zealand, or scanning Irish bogs for the vanishing islands of Celtic lore. Each excavation peels back another layer, revealing how myths encode real landscapes distorted by time but rooted in truth. The lesson here isn't just about buried treasure or drowned cities. It's about the human impulse to turn stories into journeys and journeys into understanding. Every legend that drew explorers into the unknown did more than fill maps. It expanded the boundaries of what we thought possible. And in that sense, the greatest discovery isn't the gold or the ruins. It's the realization that our oldest tales might still have something to teach us if we're willing to listen. Archaeology has a knack for turning legend into ledger, taking the vague outlines of myth and filling them with the solid ink of evidence. Consider Troy, that fabled city of epic battles and wooden horses. For centuries, scholars dismissed Homer's Iliad as pure fiction, until Heinrich Schliemann, armed with little more than a dog-eared copy of the poem and stubborn determination, unearthed its walls in modern-day Turkey. The discovery was messy, controversial, but undeniable. A civilization that matched Homer's descriptions down to the tiniest details, from the layout of its streets to the artifacts left behind in its ashes. Suddenly, a story whispered for millennia had roots in real, tangible stone. But Troy isn't alone. Off the coast of Gujarat, divers and archaeologists have spent decades piecing together the submerged ruins of Dwarka, the ancient Hindu city said to have been built by the god Krishna himself. Sonar scans reveal a sprawling network of structures, pottery shards, and even stone anchors, all dating to a time that aligns with the Mahabharata's timeline. Here's the catch: the city didn't just sink overnight. Layers of sediment suggest gradual subsidence, possibly triggered by earthquakes or rising sea levels. Over centuries, the slow drowning of Dwarka could have condensed into legend as a single, cataclysmic event, proof that myths often compress time, turning processes into moments. Yet for every Troy or Dwarka, there's a glaring limitation. Archaeology can't dig up what never existed. Take the Hyperboreans, a mythical race the Greeks believed lived beyond the north wind in a land of eternal sunshine. No amount of excavation will uncover their golden temples, because the story was never about a real place. It was a metaphor for the unexplored, the idealized other. Similarly, the Garden of Eden or Avalon's apple-laden isle resist pinning to a map, not because they're hiding, but because they serve as spiritual or psychological landmarks rather than physical ones. Archaeology thrives on evidence, but myth dances in the gaps where evidence can't reach. This tension between proof and parable raises a deeper question. How much should we expect from the ground beneath our feet? When divers off Japan's Yonaguni coast debate whether a submerged rock formation is a natural wonder or the remnants of a lost Pacific civilization, they're grappling with the limits of interpretation. The human mind loves patterns. It's why we see faces in clouds or castles in cliffs. Give us a vaguely rectangular stone, and we'll call it a temple block. Show us a worn relief, and we'll name it a god. Archaeology must walk a razor's edge, honoring indigenous knowledge and oral histories while resisting the urge to force every myth into a material mold. Perhaps the most tantalizing mysteries are those that hover just beyond reach. The Library of Alexandria's burned scrolls might have held answers about Atlantis. The crumbling codices of the Maya could have detailed their own versions of floating cities, but fire, time, and conquest erode more than bricks. They erase context. Without it, we're left with fragments, a shard of pottery that might be Atlantean or a star chart that could align with Vimana flight paths. These gaps aren't failures, they're invitations. They remind us that some stories aren't meant to be solved, only pondered, their power lying in the questions they keep alive. And speaking of questions, what happens when we look beyond the earth for clues? Because some of the most enduring myths don't just point to lost lands, they gaze upward, weaving celestial phenomena into their fabric. The next time you hear a tale of a city vanishing into the sky, consider this. Maybe it wasn't the ground that shifted, but the stars. The night sky has always been humanity's first storybook, its glittering pages filled with tales of gods, monsters, and kingdoms suspended among the stars. When ancient cultures gazed upward, they didn't just see random points of light. They saw patterns, narratives, even entire landscapes mirrored in the cosmos. Take the Maori legend of Ranginui, the Sky Father, whose body arched above the earth like a vast celestial dome. His tears were said to fall as comets, streaks of fire that might explain why so many floating city myths describe bridges of light or fiery chariots descending from the heavens. Could these stories be distorted memories of astronomical events? A meteor exploding in the atmosphere might look, to an untrained eye, like a glowing fortress crumbling from the sky. Consider the Greek myth of Aeolia, the floating island of the winds, or the Hindu Svarga, a paradise suspended in the clouds. Both descriptions align eerily with rare celestial phenomena. A particularly bright comet like Hale-Bopp in 1997 can appear to hover motionless for weeks, its tail stretching like a road into the void. The Chinese recorded guest stars supernova that blazed so brightly they were visible by day, resembling the sun crystals said to power Vimanas. Even the aurora borealis, with its undulating curtains of light, could have inspired tales of shimmering sky palaces. Without telescopes or astrophysics, our ancestors did what humans do best. They wove explanations from the threads of what they could see. This celestial terrestrial mirroring goes deeper than spectacle. Ancient cultures often mapped the heavens onto their landscapes, creating sacred geographies where earthly rivers mirrored the Milky Way and mountains echoed the peaks of constellations. The Dogon people of Mali described Sirius as the celestial twin of their homeland, while the Inca aligned Cusco's streets with the zenith passage of the sun. In this context, a floating city might not be a physical place at all, but a metaphor for the stars themselves, constellations imagined as distant metropolises where gods walk. The Mayan sky realm of Xibalba, accessed through cosmic gateways, or the Norse Asgard, connected to Earth by a rainbow bridge, could be mythic representations of celestial events like eclipses or planetary alignments. But what happens when these sky-bound stories collide with the depths below? Just as comets might have inspired floating kingdoms, underwater cities could mirror the inverse, celestial bodies that fell into the sea. The Tlingit people of the Pacific Northwest tell of a time when the moon plunged into the ocean, causing tides to surge and islands to vanish. Modern astronomers recognize this as a possible description of a meteorite impact, like the one that carved out Alaska's Sithalmenkat Lake. Similarly, the Babylonian myth of Tiamat, the chaos dragon whose split body formed the heavens and earth, echoes the cosmic violence of asteroid collisions that shaped our planet. The ocean, like the sky, became a canvas for projecting celestial dramas, except here, the stars didn't float, they drowned. This duality, rising islands and sinking stars, reveals how fluidly ancient minds moved between the heavens and the abyss. A single event like the Thara eruption could spawn both. The ash plume might birth legends of sky castles, while the tsunami it triggered inspired tales of drowned cities. The line between up and down, celestial and terrestrial, wasn't just blurred, it was interchangeable, and that's the real magic of these myths. They remind us that for our ancestors, the universe wasn't a collection of separate realms, but a living, breathing whole, where a comet's tail could become a bridge, and the seafloor might just be the underside of the sky. Beneath the waves, where sunlight fades to blue twilight, lie the bones of forgotten cities, real places that once thrived, now silent witnesses to the ocean's hunger. Take Heraklion, Egypt's legendary port swallowed by the Mediterranean over 2,000 years ago. For centuries, it was just a name in temple inscriptions, until divers discovered its colossal statues and gold-laden temples sprawled across the seabed. Or Pavloptria off Greece's coast, its streets and tombs so perfectly preserved they look like a map frozen in time. These aren't myths, they're time capsules, proof that the sea's appetite for human ambition is as old as civilization itself. What's chilling is how closely these ruins mirror the stories we've told for millennia. Heracleon's fate sinking slowly as its foundations liquefied into mud echoes Plato's description of Atlantis, disappearing beneath the sea in a single day and night. Pavloptri's submerged walls, still standing after 5,000 years, could easily be the inspiration for Welsh tales of Cantre Gwaelod, the drowned kingdom whose bells are said to still chime beneath the waves. The line between archaeology and legend blurs when you realize our ancestors weren't just making up stories, they were recording trauma. A city doesn't vanish without leaving scars in collective memory. The forces that claim these places are as varied as they are relentless. Subsidence, where soft sediments compact under a city's weight, dragged parts of ancient Rome and modern Jakarta beneath the water table. Earthquakes can drop entire coastlines in minutes, like the port of Alexandria's eastern harbor, which slid into the sea after a tremor in the 4th century. Then there's Eustace, the slow, deadly creep of rising seas. At the end of the last ice age, melting glaciers raised ocean levels by over 300 feet, drowning Doggerland, the fertile plain that once connected Britain to Europe. Today, as polar ice retreats again, history's cycle spins anew. Venice sinks, Miami's streets flood at high tide, and the Maldives drafts plans for floating neighborhoods. The past isn't just repeating itself, it's holding up a mirror. Yet for every sunken city we've found, countless others likely wait in the darkness. Less than 20% of the ocean floor has been mapped in detail, meaning the next Atlantis might already be in our sonar data, disguised as a shadowy anomaly. Off India's coast, divers have spotted what could be the remains of Kumari Kandam, a lost Tamil civilization. Near Cuba, sonar images show symmetrical stone structures half a mile down, though debate rages whether they're natural or man-made. Even the Caribbean's blue holes, underwater caves filled with stalactites, hint at dry caverns that sheltered humans before the seas claimed them. This brings us to the unspoken thread-tying myth to modernity: climate change. Our ancestors watched shorelines retreat and cities drown with no concept of greenhouse gases, only gods to blame. Today, we understand the mechanics, yet the outcome feels eerily familiar. The difference is, we're not just witnesses this time, we're the architects. As satellite images track sinking deltas and vanishing islands, we're left with a haunting question. What stories will future generations tell about our drowned cities? Will Miami become the next wise, its skyscrapers fossilized into coral reefs? Or will we rewrite the ending, using the very myths that warned us to begin with? The ocean keeps its secrets well, but not forever. With every shipwreck explored and every sonar sweep, we're piecing together a puzzle that stretches back to humanity's first shoreline campfires. And somewhere in those depths, between the cracked marble of Heracleon and the ghostly streets of Pavloptri, lies a truth more compelling than any legend. Civilizations don't just vanish. They transform into stories, into warnings, into lessons etched in salt and stone. The same forces that drowned Atlantis and swallowed Doggerland are at work today, only now we have a name for them: climate change. Rising sea levels aren't just a future threat, they're erasing islands in real time. Take the Marshall Islands, a nation of coral atolls where the highest point is barely 6 feet above water. Saltwater creeps into freshwater wells, graveyards wash into the surf, and families debate which relatives to take when they flee. It's not a myth, it's a modern-day Atlantis unfolding before our eyes. And just like the ancient stories, these losses are etching themselves into collective memory. Marshallese elders speak of Jebwan, a term for land that vanishes beneath the waves, a word that might one day echo through legends of its own. Venice, the floating city of canals and gondolas, is sinking not by mythic wrath but by concrete reality. Pumping groundwater has compacted its foundations, while rising seas push Aquaol to floods deeper into its streets. Engineers race to install flood barriers, but the water keeps coming. Sound familiar? It's the same narrative as Wise or Contra Guelod, only this time we're not blaming gods or careless priests. We're the architects of this disaster, and that changes everything. Here's where ancient myths become unexpected allies. Indigenous stories from the Pacific hold precise descriptions of coastal lines from thousands of years ago, matching geological records of sea level rise. The Kuna people of Panama tell of islands that walked away, a poetic account of erosion now confirmed by satellite data. These aren't just tales, they're data sets encoded in oral tradition. Scientists studying climate adaptation are starting to listen, collaborating with communities whose ancestors survived these catastrophes before. When a Fijian legend warns against building near the shore, it's not superstition. It's hard-won wisdom from generations who watched the ocean advance. But myths don't just warn, they inspire solutions. Floating cities, once the stuff of Hindu epics, are now blueprints for survival. In the Maldives, engineers are constructing a grid of buoyant neighborhoods modeled after coral reefs, while Denmark's Copenhagen Islands project reimagines urban life atop modular platforms. Even the Dutch, masters of land reclamation, are designing amphibious homes that rise with floodwaters. These innovations trace their roots back to the same human ingenuity that dreamed of Lanka's golden towers or Laputa's skyborne spires. The difference: today's floating cities aren't fantasies, they're lifeboats. The lesson buried in these vanishing islands, ancient and modern, isn't just about loss. It's about adaptation. Our ancestors used stories to map safe ground, mark danger zones, and pass down survival strategies. Now, as glaciers melt and coastlines retreat, we're relearning that language. The next chapter of this story won't be written in stone or water, but in the choices we make, to heed the warnings whispered by the past, or to let our own cities become the myths of tomorrow. And perhaps that's the most powerful thread connecting Atlantis to the Marshall Islands, not the tragedy of sinking, but the stubborn human refusal to let the waves have the last word. As we look ahead, the line between myth and innovation blurs further. Architects draw inspiration from the very legends that once seemed impossible, proving that the best solutions might have been floating in our stories all along. Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea didn't just entertain readers, it electrified inventors. When Simon Lake built the first modern submarine in 1897, he credited Verne's Nautilus as his muse, even naming his prototype Argonaut in homage. This wasn't an isolated case. Greek myths of Daedalus's wings sparked Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine sketches, while Hindu Vamana legends now inspire engineers designing ion thruster drones. The pattern is undeniable. Humanity's oldest stories aren't just relics, they're blueprints, whispering solutions across centuries to those willing to listen. Today's architects are taking this literally. The Oceanix project off South Korea's coast, a network of hexagonal floating platforms, echoes Plato's description of Atlantis's concentric rings. Japan's Shimizu Corporation has proposed underwater, ocean spiral cities powered by deep-sea energy, mirroring the submerged utopias of Polynesian lore. Even NASA designs for lunar habitats draw from Navajo stories of the Sky People who built dwellings woven from light. The line between myth and prototype isn't just blurring, it's dissolving. When Dubai's floating seahorse villas anchor themselves to the seabed, they're not just luxury real estate, they're modern-day interpretations of the Mahabharata's sunken Dwarka, reimagined with glass walls and hydroponic gardens. But here's the provocative question: are these projects accidentally fulfilling ancient prophecies? The the Maori legend of Te Hokioi, a flying canoe that would one day return, took on eerie resonance when the first airplanes landed in New Zealand. The Cherokee tale of a spider's web connecting all people now feels uncannily like the internet. Coincidences, maybe, or perhaps myths encode deeper truths about human potential, not as predictions but as invitations. When the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh described a flood so vast it required a giant ark, it wasn't just warning of disasters. It was implicitly challenging future generations to build something that could withstand them. Yet innovation inspired by myth isn't without its ethical shadows. As billionaires race to construct seasteading communities or orbital cities, they risk repeating the hubris of Atlantis's rulers, prioritizing technological triumph over collective survival. The very myths that inspire these breakthroughs often end with catastrophe, as if warning, this power demands wisdom. Floating cities could become gated utopias for the wealthy, leaving climate refugees stranded on sinking shores. Underwater habitats might exploit fragile marine ecosystems in the name of progress. The stories that guided us here also carry cautionary endings, ones we do well to remember. This tension between ambition and ethics sets the stage for a deeper dilemma. Who gets to write the next chapter of these age-old stories? Will floating cities be lifeboats for the many, or arks for the few? The answer might lie not in the technology itself, but in the values we choose to carry forward from the myths that inspired it. After all, every legend begins with a choice to reach for the sky or to anchor ourselves to something greater. Myths don't just explain the world, they shape it, bending history to fit the needs of those who wield them. Take Atlantis. Plato's allegory about hubris and divine punishment has been twisted into a nationalist rallying cry, a racial battleground, even a colonial blueprint. The Nazis claimed Atlantis as the ancestral home of the Aryan master race, using its imagined grandeur to justify expansion. Victorian-era occultists like Madame Blavatsky spun racist hierarchies from its supposed ruins, while modern white supremacists still peddled debunked theories about advanced Atlantean bloodlines. These distortions reveal a chilling truth: myths are never neutral. They're mirrors reflecting the agendas of those who retell them. But manipulation isn't limited to extremists. Governments and institutions sanitize myths too, cherry-picking elements that serve their narratives. Post-colonial India revitalized stories of Dwarka's sunken glory to assert Hindu identity, while China's nine-dash-line territorial claims borrow legitimacy from ancient maritime legends. Even tourism boards reframe myths as marketable commodities, selling Santorini as real-life Atlantis, while downplaying the volcanic devastation that inspired the tale. The danger lies not in the stories themselves, but in who controls their retelling. When myths become tools, their original warnings about pride, imbalance, or ecological fragility get drowned out by ideological noise. Scientists and scholars aren't immune to these traps. Early archaeologists often projected colonial biases onto discoveries, labeling advanced non-European ruins as Atlantean outposts, rather than acknowledging local ingenuity. Modern researchers face a tightrope: how to honor indigenous knowledge without exoticizing it, or debunk harmful pseudoscience without silencing marginalized voices. The Maori concept of taonga, treating ancestral stories as living treasures, offers a model, one where interpretation requires consent, not just curiosity. Yet myths also resist domination. Their fluidity makes them subversive. Haitian slaves wove West African creation tales into Catholic saints' legends, creating voodoo as an act of covert resistance. The Welsh myth of Cantre Gwaelod, once a feudal parable, now fuels climate activism, its drowned bells repurposed as sirens for rising seas. This adaptability hints at myth's deepest power. They belong to everyone and no one, evolving with each retelling. The most striking proof lies in cross-cultural parallels. From the flood stories shared by Mesopotamians and Maya to the floating cities described in Hindu and Polynesian lore, these recurring motifs suggest universal human concerns, not a single, true origin. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson. Myths thrive when they're bridges, not weapons. When scientists and storytellers collaborate, as with the merging of Inuit oral histories with glacial core data to track Arctic climate shifts, they transform ancient wisdom into tools for collective survival. The narrative isn't owned, it's shared, and in that sharing it becomes something greater than fiction or fact, a compass for navigating an uncertain future. From the icy coasts of Scandinavia to the tropical shores of Polynesia, stories of vanishing islands emerge with eerie consistency, as if humanity shared a collective nightmare. The Norse spoke of Lyngbakka, a whale-shaped island that sank when sailors tried to land, while Hawaiian legends described Te Fiti, a lush paradise swallowed by the sea after its heart was stolen. Even the indigenous Tlingit of Alaska tell of villages disappearing overnight when the raven spirit stamped his foot. Separated by oceans and centuries, these cultures had no way to exchange tales, yet their myths mirror one another with uncanny precision. What explains this global echo? One theory, diffusionism, suggests ancient seafarers carried stories across continents like precious cargo. The Phoenicians, for instance, traded from Britain to India. Could they have spread a proto-myth of sinking lands? Yet some parallels defy this logic. The Maori tale of Tionamonu and the Welsh Cantre'r Gwaelod both describe bells ringing underwater, a detail too specific for coincidence but separated by 12,000 miles. This leads to a more provocative idea, Carl Jung's collective unconscious. Perhaps tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and rising seas imprinted primal fears deep in the human psyche, erupting as similar symbols worldwide. When disaster strikes, the mind reaches for familiar shapes, a sinking island, a vengeful god, a warning cry. Shared environmental trauma offers another key. Coastal cultures from Japan to Peru witnessed lands vanish beneath waves, crafting stories to explain the inexplicable. The Jomon people's sunken settlements off Japan's coast align with their myth of the dragon Watatsumi dragging villages underwater. Similarly, the Aboriginal story of Guraguda, an island consumed by the sea, matches geological evidence of post-ice age flooding. These aren't just tales, they're survival logs recording cataclysms too vast to forget. Yet the most haunting parallels lie in the details. The Greek sirens luring sailors to drowned cliffs find their twin in the Marshallese Wojibato, a submerged atoll said to sing during storms. Both serve as navigational warnings disguised as enchantment. Even the motif of a sunken golden city repeats from the Hindu Dwarka to the Cornish lioness, suggesting a deep link between wealth, hubris, and ruin. But here's the twist: these myths don't just reflect fear, they reveal how humans process loss through narrative. A tsunami isn't just water, it's a deity's wrath. Erosion isn't gradual decay, it's punishment for moral failing. By personifying natural forces, our ancestors made chaos comprehensible and survivable. As we trace these threads, a question lingers. If myths are rooted in universal experiences, where does the line between truth and tale truly begin? Perhaps the answer lies not in the stories themselves, but in what they dared to imagine and what we're still discovering beneath the waves. For all the fascinating intersections between myth and science, there comes a point where the two must respectfully part ways. No matter how meticulously we comb through ancient texts or scan the ocean floor, some legends simply resist explanation. Take the Norse Yggdrasil, a cosmic tree connecting 9 worlds, its roots drinking from mystical springs. No dendrologist will ever uncover its bark. No telescope will spot the eagle perched in its branches. And that's precisely the point. Some stories aren't meant to be dissected under microscopes or plotted on graphs. They exist to stretch our imagination, to remind us that the universe still holds pockets of delicious uncertainty. This tension between knowing and wondering isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Imagine if every mystery were solved. No more sphinxes guarding riddles, no more undiscovered continents lurking on maps. The thrill of the unknown is what keeps both science and storytelling alive. When physicists debate quantum multiverses or biologists probe the origins of consciousness, they're chasing the same fundamental awe that inspired shamans to dream of sky realms and underwater kingdoms. Myths in this light aren't failed science, they're the original thought experiments daring us to ask, what if, long before we had labs or telescopes? Yet even as we celebrate this mystery, we must tread carefully. Romanticizing myths can veer into dangerous territory, like dismissing indigenous flood stories as mere folklore while ignoring their very real warnings about climate vulnerability. The Maori tale of Te Ika Amoy, where the demigod Maui fished up the North Island, isn't just a charming creation myth, it encodes generations of seismic and oceanic observations. To reduce it to pure fantasy would be to erase a cultural blueprint for survival. The balance lies in honoring stories as both art and artifact, neither reducing them to cold data nor elevating them beyond critique. What's remarkable is how myths adapt when science reshapes our understanding. The Greek Atlas, once literally holding the sky on his shoulders, now lends his name to satellite mapping systems. The celestial spheres of medieval cosmology have morphed into string theories vibrating dimensions. These narratives don't die, they evolve, finding new relevance in changing worlds. Perhaps that's their greatest magic, not in being proven true, but in remaining useful, flexible, and endlessly reinterpretable. As we peer into the future, this dance between myth and discovery shows no signs of stopping. With AI unraveling ancient scripts and deep-sea robots probing uncharted trenches, we're bound to uncover new connections and new mysteries. Some legends will solidify into history, while others will forever hover at the edges of understanding. And that's exactly as it should be, because in the end, a world where every story has been fact-checked is a world with no room left to dream. Now, as we turn from the past to the horizon ahead, one question lingers: how will the myths of tomorrow take shape? Will our own era's wonders, black holes, quantum entanglement, bioengineered life inspire tales as enduring as Atlantis or Yggdrasil? The answer lies not just in what we discover, but in how we choose to tell the story. Imagine an AI trained on every myth ever recorded, scanning thousands of texts for patterns humans might miss. What if it uncovered links between flood legends and prehistoric sea level spikes we haven't yet mapped? Or decoded celestial references in Aboriginal Dreamtime stories to pinpoint exact meteor showers from 12,000 years ago? This isn't science fiction, it's the near future. Machine learning is already analyzing ancient scripts like Linear B and Indus Valley symbols, teasing out meanings lost for millennia. Soon, algorithms might cross-reference geological data with oral histories, revealing how real events morphed into legend. The next Atlantis discovery might not come from a diver's flashlight, but from a neural network connecting Plato's coordinates to submerged ruins off Portugal's coast. But technology won't just solve old myths, it'll birth new ones. Picture deep-sea drones filming bioluminescent creatures in the Mariana Trench, their alien forms sparking tales of modern-day krakens or merfolk. When submersibles finally reach the Antarctic subglacial lakes, Might their discoveries, say, microbial life in pitch-black depths, inspire legends of underworld spirits? Even space exploration fuels fresh lore. Astronauts report orbital sunrise, where the sun rises 16 times a day. Future colonists on Mars, watching Earth flicker in the sky like a pale blue star, could weave myths about the mother planet gazing down at them. The most intriguing twist: our tools are becoming mythic themselves. AI's black box problem, where even engineers can't fully trace its decisions, echoes ancient oracles whose logic was equally inscrutable. Quantum computing, with particles existing in multiple states at once, feels eerily like Norse cosmology's overlapping realms. As we push boundaries, we're recreating the same awe that once made people blame storms on thunder gods or attribute eclipses to celestial wolves. The difference is now we're both the mythmakers and the scientists testing those myths. Yet amid this fusion, one thing remains unchanged: our hunger for wonder. Whether it's a holographic historian reconstructing Babylon or a child hearing about CRISPR-edited dragons, stories will always bridge the known and the imagined. That's the real magic, not that myths become real, but that reality keeps becoming mythic. And as long as we keep exploring, whether through sonar or satellites, the next great legend might already be taking shape, not in some forgotten parchment, but in the data streams and dive logs of tomorrow. So where does this leave us? Perhaps at the threshold of a new era, where every discovery spawns fresh mysteries and every tool resurrects old questions in dazzling ways. Because the deepest truth these tales reveal isn't about lost cities or floating islands, it's about us. Our relentless curiosity, our need to explain the inexplicable, and our refusal to let the unknown stay that way for long. And that's a story with no end in sight. These vanishing islands and floating cities grip our imagination not because they're relics of the past, but because they hold up a mirror to the present. At their core, these myths grapple with themes as old as humanity itself: hubris, resilience, the delicate dance between ambition and consequence. Take Atlantis, that golden empire swallowed by the sea. Plato didn't spin it as a bedtime story, he framed it as a warning, a civilization drunk on its own power, deaf to the rhythms of nature, ultimately undone by its arrogance. Sound familiar? Substitute bronze towers for skyscrapers, Poseidon's wrath for rising sea levels, and suddenly, Atlantis isn't just a legend, it's a parable for the Anthropocene. But these stories aren't just about doom, they're also survival manuals. The Maori legend of Tianemon doesn't end with the island's disappearance. It teaches how to read the ocean's retreat as a tsunami warning. The Welsh Cantref Gwaelod, drowned when a well was left unguarded, underscores the fragility of human systems against nature's force. Even the Flying Dutchman, cursed to sail forever, speaks to the perils of ignoring boundaries, whether geographical or ethical. What makes these tales endure isn't their tragedy, it's their insistence that knowledge, however hard-won, can outlast catastrophe. The ecological lessons woven into these myths are startlingly precise. Aboriginal Australian stories describe coastlines from 10,000 years ago, matching geological records of Ice Age sea level rise. The Norse tale of Ragnarök, with its poisoned skies and crumbling lands, reads like a premonition of climate collapse. These narratives didn't emerge from vacuum, they're distilled observations passed down because they mattered. When Marshallese elders today speak of a Jebwan, land lost to waves, they're continuing a tradition as old as storytelling itself, using myth to map the line between survival and oblivion. Yet there's another reason these stories resonate. They validate our longing for exploration. The same impulse that sent Phoenicians sailing beyond the Pillars of Hercules now drives billionaires toward Mars. Myths like Lanka's floating towers or Hyperborea's eternal sunshine aren't just fantasies, they're prototypes daring us to imagine what lies beyond the horizon. The irony, many legends end with explorers overreaching, Icarus falling, Odysseus losing his crew, suggesting that curiosity must be tempered with wisdom. In an age of deep sea mining and AI, that balance feels more urgent than ever. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in how these stories adapt. Atlantis has been claimed by Nazis, occultists, and marine archaeologists, yet its core warning remains intact. The flood myths, whether from Mesopotamia or Mesoamerica, keep evolving from divine punishment to climate allegory. That fluidity is their power. They're not locked in the past, they're conversations stretching across centuries, inviting each generation to find new meaning in the old patterns. So what do we take from these whispers of drowned kingdoms and skyborne cities? That human ambition is both our greatest strength and most glaring vulnerability. That survival depends on listening to the ocean, to the stars, to the stories that outlive empires, and most of all, that the line between myth and manual was never as clear as we thought. As we face our own era's rising tides, these ancient narratives offer something priceless, not answers but perspective. The next chapter isn't written yet, but the warnings and the wonders are already here. The threads connecting myth to reality are stronger than we ever imagined, not as literal truths, but as brilliant tapestries woven from observation, survival, and sheer human ingenuity. Consider the volcanic island of Thera, whose apocalyptic eruption 3,600 years ago left behind a caldera so vast, it matches Plato's description of Atlantis's concentric rings. Or the submerged ruins of Dwarka, where marine archaeologists found stone anchors and pottery shards precisely where ancient texts said Krishna's golden city once stood. These aren't coincidences, they're clues left by cultures who recorded cataclysms the only way they could, through stories designed to outlast stone tablets and papyrus. What's revelatory is how disciplines once at odds, geology, mythology, astronomy, now collaborate to decode these narratives. Dendrochronologists study tree rings to pinpoint the droughts that inspired Norse tales of Fimbulwinter, while sonar maps of Doggerland reveal landscapes that match Celtic flood myths. Even celestial mechanics plays a role. When astronomers reconstructed the night sky over Babylon on the date the Epic of Gilgamesh was written, they found Venus positioned exactly as described during the flood narrative. This interdisciplinary alchemy transforms what scholars once dismissed as fantasy into a new kind of historical record, one written in tsunamis, volcanic ash, and the slow creep of rising seas. The real magic lies in how these stories encode practical wisdom. The Aboriginal tale of the Wadjil, a serpent whose movements shaped rivers, mirrors modern hydrology's understanding of meandering waterways. The Inuit legend of Sela, a spirit whose breath brings storms, captures the unpredictability of Arctic weather systems. These myths weren't primitive science, they were sophisticated knowledge transfer, using narrative to teach navigation, agriculture, and disaster preparedness across generations. When the Klamath people described Mount Mazama's eruption as a battle between sky and underworld spirits, they preserved a geological event so accurately, modern volcanologists used their account to date the collapse. This fusion of science and legend challenges us to rethink what evidence means. Oral traditions once dismissed as folklore now help climate scientists track millennia of sea level rise, while sonar scans validate flood stories from India to Wales. The lesson isn't that myths are literal, it's that they're resilient. When a Maori elder recounts how Tianumanyu vanished after the ocean receded unnaturally far, they're not just telling a story, they're handing down a tsunami survival guide wrapped in metaphor. As we stand at the intersection of satellite imagery and ancient poetry, one truth becomes clear. These stories endure because they're more than entertainment. They're time capsules of human resilience, warning labels on the fragile edges of civilization, and love letters to curiosity itself. The next time you hear a tale about a sinking island or a floating city, listen closely, not for the splash of fantasy, but for the whisper of something far more extraordinary, the voice of the past still speaking. From the moment our ancestors first spun tales of sinking lands and floating cities, they weren't just entertaining each other. They were building bridges between the seen and the unseen, the known and the unimaginable. What's breathtaking is how these myths, once dismissed as mere fantasy, now serve as waypoints for modern science, guiding researchers to submerged ruins, ancient climate data, and even cutting-edge engineering breakthroughs. The stories of Atlantis and Dwarka aren't relics gathering dust on library shelves, they're alive, pulsing with new meaning every time a sonar scan reveals another sunken settlement or a climate model confirms an oral history's warning. Consider this: the same Polynesian navigators who charted the Pacific by stars also preserved tales of Tianemanu, an island swallowed by the sea. Today, their descendants collaborate with geologists, using those very stories to track underwater volcanic activity. Or take Plato's Atlantis, once mocked as philosophical allegory, now a lens through which oceanographers study the catastrophic collapse of real Bronze Age cities. These narratives were never just stories. They were the original datasets, encoded in rhythm and metaphor to survive where ink and parchment could not. There's a beautiful symmetry here. Just as ancient myths borrowed from the natural world, volcanoes became gods, comets became chariots, modern science borrows back, finding inspiration in those same tales. Engineers designing floating cities study the hydraulic precision of Aztec chinumpers, while astronomers searching for exoplanets invoke the Maori sky father Ranganui to remember how deeply our cosmos is woven with story. The dialogue between past and present isn't just academic, it's a testament to humanity's unbroken chain of curiosity. As the writer Arthur C. Clarke once observed, magic is just science we don't understand yet. Perhaps that's the real lesson of these vanishing islands and airborne kingdoms, not that our ancestors were wrong about how the world works, but that they were right in ways we're only beginning to grasp. Their myths weren't failures of imagination, they were its first drafts written in the language of awe. Now we want to hear from you. What legends grip your imagination? The lost city of Z, the Flying Dutchman, or something deeper from your own cultural heritage? Drop your favorites in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation sailing. If you're hungry for more journeys where myth and history collide, hit subscribe and join us as we keep unraveling the secrets buried in time's deepest layers. The next lost world might be just one click away.